Well, thank you, Ed. Thank you, Pat, for inviting me here and giving me this opportunity to talk about one of the themes, which I find very fascinating, and I hope you will too. Let me see if I can figure this out. Yes, so the women of the 19th century modernist movement. What I would like to show you in this short introduction to the women of the 19th century modernist movement is the essential role that the women played in the break of modernism, not as a separate group, but as an actually part of the modernist movement. Unfortunately, here I only show the pictures of the women, but it should be seen as a greater part of the whole modernist movement, together with all the male artists as well. I would like to show that despite all the challenges that the women artists faced, many women still succeeded in becoming well-respected and acknowledged artists. As I will advocate for in this speech, the success of the women were not only their ability to form very strong networks, international networks and national networks, and the way they kept pushing for regaining equal rights. It's also the fact that they could actually paint, and their artistic success had everything to do with how they managed to position themselves in the break of modernism. So, Paris. All artists with respect for themselves went to Paris in the years 1870s to the 1890s. They came to absorb and learn the new ideologies emerging from the Paris salons and the artists such as Léon Bonnat, Edgar Degas, Edouard Manet, and Auguste Renoir, just to mention a few, which you already know. The breakthrough of modernism and the artistic styles as Impressionism and Nationalism are commonly seen as a visual consequence of the radical changes in lifestyle, the mentality, and not to mention the urban space, as we've already been told by Thomas Björk. It was also the radical changes that happened these years where Paris was seen as one of the forerunners. Especially Charles Baudelaire is known to articulate this modernist movement as the sum of modernist life lived in this new public sphere, on the boulevards, the cafes, the theaters, the bars, and the brothels. The artist's role was to absorb and capture these fragments of life and turn it into a visual outburst containing both the feeling of alienation and solidarity with this new urban lifestyle. And well-known examples of this are shown here. We have Auguste Renoir, we have Manet, we have Degas, and these shown what is usually seen as a modernist way of life. It's in boulevards, it's in the cafes and theaters, and it is in the artist studio. It was a man's world, as we see here, and is what is typically shown. It is kind of the gaze of the man, which is obvious. The stroll through the city, the visit in the bar, looking at the woman behind the bar, most likely a fallen woman, since you have to be working there. And also you have in the studio, you actually have a doll lying. You can analyze that, but kind of the way they looked at women as objects in their way of perceiving the new modernity and the life in the urban Paris. So, where did the women fit in there? If you think about it, the ones who were actually living out the possibilities of modern life were the women and not the men. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't find it particularly modern part of modern life that men went to bars or theaters or strolls through the city day and night. But it was something new for the women. Although it seems like the modernist movement were articulated, painted, and lived by and for the men, the role of the women artists in the break of modernism should not be underestimated. Paris also meant for them a new way of life, a fundamental breakaway from the traditional life of a woman, even a woman artist at that time. They traveled very far, often alone. There came a lot of women all the way from the US, and they traveled all the way to Europe to come to Paris alone. They lived many years departed from their families, and they experienced the international artistic movement through a liberating sphere of work and socializing outside their national home and environment. As we see here, just two examples of this new way of looking at the woman as they perceive themselves. And Marie Baskoshev, I've quoted here, she wrote, for many years she's been to Paris. In the studio, everything disappears. You have no name, no family. You are no longer your mother's daughter. You're yourself. You're an individual, and you must create art, nothing else. You feel satisfied, so free, so proud. And that was a shift in the mentality. That was a shift from how women were normally looked upon, how women normally looked upon themselves. That was what I see as an essential part of the modernity. We see in the painting by Ellen Danielsen-Gamborg from Finland. This is a new way of looking at the women, not that she's at the dinner table or the tea table, but actually she's smoking, and you can see the smoke coming out through her mouth. She's thinking, she's deep in thoughts. Behind her you can see some drawings, most likely the self-portrait, this one. And the table is a mess, but she doesn't care. She's sitting there enjoying her cigarette, thinking about what to do next. I don't think she's thinking about what to prepare for dinner tonight. She's probably thinking about, what should I paint now? Or what should I do now with my life? Or whatever. And the other painting is by Hina Kish Powley. She also married the name Powley because she married another painter. This one is from Paris. And is showing the Finnish sculptor Venni Solden-Brofeld. And this is also a very untypical way of portraying a woman from this time. I don't even know where to begin. Well, she's sitting on the floor. She's wearing her slippers. She's got dirty hands, and she's actually in the middle of the process of making a sketch. In the background, you can see a sculpture. Kind of difficult to see what the sculpture actually shows, but there might be some erotic undertones there. So, women and modernism. With Paris as a pivotal point for new ideas emerging within painting, this is also the place where many women found not only their self-confidence and acknowledgement as artists, they also found a place to gain proper schooling, and probably most important of all, they found a social network of like-minded, where art could be discussed, produced, and exhibited on equal terms as the men, as though their part of the artistic movement had to be played out in a somewhat different scenery than that of the men. The woman could not live and absorb the modernist life as determined by Baudelaire and the male artists that we saw before, or as we've already seen today. But this does not mean that the women were not actually benefiters to and from the modernist breakthrough. They came together instead in the studios, in the private homes of each other, where they find a common ground to express and visualize their experiences. Far away from the modern life, from the nightlife and the bars and theaters, which the men engaged in and found artistic inspiration from, they nevertheless competed and developed an idiom just as fresh and groundbreaking as their fellow male colleagues. An international network of women artists were founded and grounded in Paris by something they could bring with them home, and maybe because they found inspiration and motivation in somewhat more familiar surroundings, their artwork could be appreciated not only in Paris, but also when they returned home. And as we see here is just a few examples of how the women got together. We have the studio. Marie Baskoshev shows the women how they are in the middle of learning how to sketch. You have a painting by Berta Wegman. She actually worked on it for several years, but also shows a visit to the studio. And seems like just two friends talking about whatever girlfriends talk about when they're drinking tea. But when you take a closer look at it, you can see they're actually in a painting studio. And they're actually engaged in a very firm discussion about something. Your eye is kind of intrigued because you try to figure out what the room is actually like. And then the last painting is by Anna Peterson, and just shows how many of these relationships formed in Paris actually lasted for a very long time. Here we see three artists, actually four, if you count the violinist. We see Marie Kreuer, we see Shanna Bauk, and we see Berta Wegman, which we'll return to. And the violinist is a young, forthcoming violinist from Finland. So this is how they came together, even many years after they left Paris, and still worked together and had evenings to discuss art and enjoy music. So, how to explain that many of the women artists of the time gained respect and acknowledgement not only in their home countries, but at the Paris salons as well. Shut out from academic training at their academies, as were the case in Denmark, and left out of equal rights and cut off from art societies, as were the case for women both in Scandinavia and the US. Surely they have been let out of the grand art history, but this does not mean that they were disregarded and left out of the exhibitions, critic writings, and most extraordinary of all, they were highly appreciated among private donors and collectors in the 19th century. You might not find them that well represented in museums. You might not find them at all, actually, in most museums. Instead, you will find them in private homes. It makes it difficult to this day, actually, to find their piece of work and rewrite their history into the art history, because their paintings are lost for the public eye. I like to view the work of the women not as a result of their social conditions and position in society and their fight for equal rights, but instead I would like to shift the focus to the actual paintings and the receptions of these. To explain this, I found very good response in using reception theory, as formed by the two Germans, Hans Robert Jauss and Wolfgang Iser, who formed their theories on reception in the 1960s, also known as the constant school. Hans Robert Jauss, he worked with an expression or a term called the horizon of expectations. How does a piece of work, a painting or a book, meet the expectations of the time when it's produced? Wolfgang Iser, he works with a term called empty spaces, indefinite units, which is the small empty places in the pieces of work where it's left up to the viewer to actually finish off the work, to use imagination to create or finish the work. Originally it was a literary theory, but is well applied into the art history as well. As I will show here, I will try to use it on this painting by Berta Wegmann. Wegmann was originally born in Switzerland, but came to Denmark when she was 5 years old. She took her education in Germany and also started a studio for young girls in Germany. And later, in the 1880s, she moved to Paris, where she studied, among others, at Manet's studio. And this portrait was actually made in her, it was her second portrait, which was shown at the Salon, Symposium des Beaux-Arts, in 1882, where it won the medal of the 3rd class. And actually, just the year before, it was the same medal as P.S. Krøyer won. And in Denmark, these two artists were actually compared and seen as being the two best portraitists of that time. So this just shows that even though we don't know her today, all know P.S. Krøyer, no one knows Berta Wegmann. At the time, he was very well known and respected. So what do we see here? We see a portrait which works within the traditional horizon of expectations. It shows a woman gazing out at the viewer, and she's sitting knitting, which is very common when you show a woman. But then again, there's something quite different going on in the painting. There's something quite disturbing if you take a closer look. And this is where the indefinite units come into play. Because what is she doing with her fingers? And why is she looking at us in the way she does? It's kind of not arrogant, but kind of direct gaze. And while playing, she's kind of making us think, what is she thinking about? Why is she looking at us in this way? And this is something new. This is something that Wegmann brought with her from Paris. This was a new way of portraying women, or portraying in general. Also, you have a lot of portraits of men which are doing the same. They're playing with something. Their mind is going on. It's not just a still life of a woman just being portrayed. It's actually a snapshot of a woman thinking about something, and we're not allowed to know what she's actually thinking about. Here's another picture, painting also by Bertha Wegmann. It's a bit later, and this is showing Marie Tripke, who later married B.S. Krøyer. They met in Paris. Marie and Krøyer met in Paris in 1888 and got married in 1889. Marie was an artist herself. At this point, when this portrait was made, she followed different studios, and she was about to go to Paris as well. And Wegmann, at this point, was a very established artist, so Marie asked Wegmann when this was made, so how do I become a respected artist? What to do? And Wegmann was just, you need to work hard. So, and again, we're within the traditional framework of a portrait, and she looks very nice. She looks, she's smiling, she looks pretty. But then again, there's something else going on, because the painting looks like it's not finished. And it is finished. It is the way it was supposed to look. But instead of having an umbrella, it kind of looked like the end of an umbrella. It transforms into a brush, and she's actually working on the portrait herself. She's participating in creating herself, her own portrait, and her own identity as an artist. Yeah, in that way, it's kind of playing with our reception, and it's playing with our minds, our imagination. And here's another interesting interior with a bouquet from 1884, also by Wegmann, and also shows how she plays with our reception, makes us wonder and be surprised. It's not only showing us something about the artist behind this painting, it's also triggering our mind, maybe to go above the limits of our moral ethics or what we would like to think about, because unfortunately we can't see it on this reproduction, but in the sofa you can see a long pipe. At the table there's a cigar. There's a half-empty, half-filled glass on the table, and there's a letter being written, and then actually her signature is on that letter, and there's some flowers spread all over. And then if you look at the window, you can actually see the reflection of a man. Oops. So what's going on here? So the woman is just not living for her art. There's actually a man present in her life, in the room. Yeah. And just to show a few other interior paintings from some of the women. Actually, it was mostly their portraits which were acknowledged and exhibited, but of course they did a lot of interior paintings as well, and some of them are also, one of the most famous is Anna Anker, married to Michael Anker, who was from Scan, the Scan group. And what's going on here is also there's something different going on. There's a lot of open doors, open windows. You're not quite sure what the women are actually doing, what they're thinking, and what the room, what is it, what's going on? Makes you wonder, makes you stop to think. Yeah, not much more to say about this. And then just to show that it's not just a theory that I can put down upon these paintings, even the critics at the time noticed these things as well. As one critic is writing here, the painter, and he was thinking about Wegmann, among others, knows something about her models, and we who looks at them, we know something too. It's probably not the same we know, and maybe none of it is the truth. However, life creates life, and behind all life, there's something unconcealed, something secret, something alluring, which is the purpose of art, to awaken. And this is how the women position themselves in the modernist movement, not just as painters, being able to portray the women's life from a woman's point of view. No, they managed to work within the horizons of their expectations, making their work appreciated and welcomed at the exhibitions as well in the private homes, in the national environment as well as abroad. At the same time, they managed to absorb the brushstroke from the naturalist impressionist movement and often incorporate something unsaid, something concealed, intriguing and capturing about the persons portrayed. If we find it interesting today, how must it not have seemed to the audience at that time? How must it not have challenged their mindset and fixed ideas? So just to conclude and finish up, this is just another brilliant portrait by Bert Wegmann, also painted in Paris and shown at the Salon, where it got a medal as well, mentioned honorable medal. And it's showing her Swedish friend Hina, who was also an artist. And this is also the essence of a woman painted in Paris. It's almost impressionist in brush and brush strokes, how the sun is playing in her hair. It looks like a snapshot of her friends just sitting on the table, like a photograph. She's looking directly at us. She's smiling. She got a book in her hand, so apparently she reads. It's capturing the feeling of liberty and happiness and spontaneous life that they could live and absorb in Paris and take with them home. So this sums up one of the most important roles of the women artists of the modernist movement, to push the limits of traditional thinking and fix ideas, not only on painting, but in the way of life in general. Not because they were women, but because they were very great artists.